Hello and welcome to the Keen on Yoga podcast again. So I'm back this week after a brief hiatus. Last week we had Peter A. Levine, and the week before I think Andre Lapper, I believe. So I've been away for a couple of weeks, but I'm back now after a long period of intensives and intensive teaching really in Europe. I'm taking a little break for the summer. I'll still be teaching online, so I'd love to see you in the Zoom classes, the online Zoom classes. Or maybe I will see you in the fall or winter in Goa, in Salento in Italy, or Malaga in Spain. Those are the next on the agenda. Or next year, we've got an exciting lineup, including Sri Lanka. So have a look at the website if you haven't kept abreast of what I'm doing, and I'd love to see you somewhere. Anyway, carrying on the back of the Peter A. Levine podcast last week, I thought I would mention today the idea of trauma in the body again, and what it means to do yoga, and how or what we're trying to resolve when we're doing yoga. Right? So I think conventionally in the popular mind, we take yoga as just simply relaxation or relaxation to prepare for meditation, right? As if all we need is just to relax. But of course, it's deeper than that, because yes, relaxation works in the moment, but in the long term it doesn't, because there's a deeper tension there. And that deeper tension there actually requires going into the state of arousal, going into the very state of tension, the emotional body of tension, to do something on that level. So that takes the right tension. And that is the basis of Hatha yoga. Ha meaning force, forceful yoga, not literally forceful, but just going into the state of arousal that's not relaxed, to go through it in a different way, to go through it under lab conditions, under controlled conditions in a classroom, when you've chosen to do it, so you experience the whole cycle of arousal in a different way and don't come out traumatized again. Yeah. Anyway, we can come back to that in a minute, because the title of this podcast today was There's a season for everything. So sometimes we need to use yoga to simply put a cap on it, to relax, to not deal with things, to escape. That would be a certain style of yoga, a certain approach to yoga asanas. You could say that would be more the regulate kind of asana work. And regulation in the asana world is so popular these days. Regulation is really the new awareness, isn't it? To be regulated in your nervous system. But Hatha yoga actually asks for a slight dysregulation. That's the irony of it. That's the paradox. Getting slightly dysregulated to regulate in a deeper way. Right? In broad strokes, we've got two nervous systems, haven't we? And I do think there's a lot of grey area in between the sympathetic nervous system, rest and digest, and the parasympathetic nervous system of... Sorry, I got it the wrong way. The parasympathetic nervous system is rest and digest. The sympathetic nervous system is fight or flight. And in between, I think there's levels of arousal, right? So if we're trying to regulate and use yoga simply for regulation, we're going into that nervous system of rest and digest, right? The parasympathetic nervous system. And I hear often comments to me or comments on social media that that's just what yoga should be, getting into that state of regulation, down regulation. But I don't believe that. I think that the tantric Hatha yoga was originally based on stimulating the body, getting into a state of somewhat hyper arousal, getting to the sympathetic nervous system to go through something. That was certainly the reason why I got Peter on in the first place, of course. I was lucky to get him on and he agreed. But because I read his book 20 odd years ago, Waking the Tiger, and that's exactly what he's saying there, that that because the body just needs to regulate. Sorry, let's say that in a different way. The body always wishes for homeostasis, as does the mind, as does the emotions. So physically, it tries to keep us regulated, blood temperature, muscular tension, etc. But mentally and emotionally, the body tries to keep us regulated as well through, if there's a situation in the present that's too much, that's felt to be overwhelming, then there's a shutdown. Yeah. And because we haven't gone through the process of being challenged and going through that, therefore we have all this stuff that's stored kind of tension in the body that makes us frozen in the moment, or then we manifest other symptoms, anxiety and depression, because of emotionals that haven't been gone through, because the body has just shut down on us. Because the body is just a blind watchmaker, as it were. It doesn't know what it's doing. It just does what it can to keep us safe. So homeostasis is all the body knows. Yeah. But of course, we're organic and we're living, so we can't live in homeostasis. We get stuck. So there's all this stuff somewhere that is unprocessed emotion. And what Peter saw in the wild was when a gazelle or a deer or something was chased by a big cat, and the gazelle either got caught or feigned death, pretended to be dead. If it got caught and the big cat suddenly turned around, it might run away. And if it escaped after this almost death experience, this near-death experience, then what he saw was that the deer would shake. Yeah, it would go through a state. It's gone through a hyper-arousal state to escape the predator. It has feigned death by shut down, briefly, and then if it had escaped again, it had gone through the state of getting out those emotions. And we don't go through this whole cycle of arousal. So what has this got to do with seasons? Going back to my original question. Well, there's a season for everything. There's a season for Hatha yoga, the yoga of getting into the sympathetic nervous system and going through stuff and doing your work, in which case it's cathartic. And I meant to mention my understanding of the process very intuitively when I started yoga was that there was this getting stuff out, this purging, this feeling that there was a lot of emotion stuck in the body that the talking therapies I've been doing hadn't touched. And so in order to resolve at a deeper level, and remember I was very young even at that time, I knew that I had to get into the body and touch this energy that was stuck in the body. And the yoga did that, and that's why I keep teaching it today, because it just worked so well. And now I know why it worked. I didn't even really, although I'd read Peter's stuff then, I didn't really understand. But as I get further into it, I can see that the Hatha yoga is based on this kind of this stimulation, right? The postures are stimulating. This, particularly the stress on the spine is stimulating, right? You're stressing the spine by turning it, by twisting it, by bending it quite dynamically forward and back. Yep. So there's a stimulation in the very postures, and there's a dynamism in the raising the heart rate. Like there's a lot of movement, right? And that gets you into the sympathetic nervous system. As soon as your heart rate is raised, right, you're going towards that kind of state of arousal, that state of fight or flight. Not in a bad way. The thing is, we need both nervous systems, and we need to move between the two. But sometimes in your yoga practice, in your daily or weekly practice, you don't need to do that kind of yoga. But you're not in that place. Right? Sometimes you need to just use yoga for regulation. And that's more the Patanjali yoga, right? We imagine when Patanjali is talking in the Yoga Sutras, well, we know from the commentary that he's only talking about a few asanas, and they're simple asanas, and they're for the sake of preparing the body, relaxing the body for meditation. So both yoga uses of asana are bona fide. They're both authentic, traditional uses of asana, but they're very different. So at certain points, the use of Hatha yoga to cleanse, to go through the state of arousal. But at other times of life, if you're stressed, if you're having a difficult time in personal relationships, if your health challenges are presenting, all these things would suggest to me that you don't need to be using yoga in that manner. In which case, you should be using yoga just to regulate your nervous system, just to put a cap on it, just to ground yourself, relax yourself, nurture yourself. Not for this rather more intense form of catharsis that Hatha yoga presents to us. Yep. So different forms of asana would need different techniques. If our aims are different, then our methods must be different to suit that. Which isn't to say you don't come back to the Hatha yoga, of course, because the quickest way isn't always a straight line, right? I heard that quote recently. It wasn't my own. It's an excellent quote, right? You don't just go in a straight line forward. You toggle. Yep. Sometimes you need to use yoga just to put a cap on it. Sometimes you can afford to go there and go deeper, right? It just depends on what part of life you're in. And there's seasons and there's micro seasons, right? In terms of small cycles, albeit a month or 6 months, and big seasons, right? As we age and, a larger kind of scope on our life, right? So there's all these cycles, all these spirals, and it's not a straight line. Yeah? It's never a straight line in one direction. So to that end, variation is essential, which is what I always wanted to touch on as well, is that as much as repetition is the basis of practice, right? Any practice is based on repeating stuff, right? And when you repeat an action, you're thrown back on yourself because the action is known, the action is repeated, so it's probably not got a particular material aim. It's repeated for the sake of putting you back onto your consciousness. But it's also repeated because, for example, in the Hatha yoga, you're trying to, you're repeating the action to bring yourself repeatedly into the nervous system in a certain way. And, well, of course, repetition works because you get a grip of what's going on and you can develop technique and etc. But sometimes, all the time, in fact, repetition needs to be balanced by variation. Variation is the antithesis of repetition, or perhaps the natural partner. Practice was never meant to bind you to the sake of playing a musical scale all the time. With variation, you should be able to vary those scales, vary that template to suit daily life. So what I'm saying is that, yes, it's very helpful to know where you're at, to repeat stuff. And it works, right? But it's easy to get into this rut where you're repeating, and it's working, and suddenly it's not working, but you don't notice it. And gradually it's working less and less. But you're so used to repeating that in the end, you end up in this place where you're repeating this thing that's really not working for you. Yeah, because you haven't realized or haven't been willing to recognize that we have to take responsibility to vary the repetition because we have cycles, because we have seasons, yeah, because we're an organic being, yeah, not a computer program. Yeah? And that's hard because taking responsibility for our practice is not easy. Right? It's much easier just to repeat a formula every day, but that's not actually doing yoga, right? That's just repeating someone else's formula, right? Well, we're really doing yoga. We have to look at our bodies and check in and see what we're really needing that day. Yeah. And that probably doesn't necessarily mean making huge variations every day, but from day to day, there will be variations if you're really paying attention to what your body needs. So how do you do that? Well, first of all, on a practical level, perhaps come to the mat and don't just start practicing. Wait there for a minute or two. Scan the body, feel the body, then ask yourself the question, what do you need today? Okay. And maybe that changes throughout practice. Maybe you feel like, I need a vigorous practice, and then at a certain point in practice, feelings or feelings in the body or feelings in the mind come up, and you start to feel, well, I don't feel that maybe I really do. That's not really, and feel free to change it. Yeah. If it's not working as you start, you can vary it at any point in time and change it. If you're doing yoga for the sympathetic nervous system, that's the arousing one, the Hatha yoga. And sometimes it's relevant. I'm repeating myself, by the way. But if you start doing that kind of yoga and it's not working that day and you feel you need something more nurturing, change to yoga for the parasympathetic nervous system, for regulating the nervous system. But that means you do have to change things practically. Yep. You wouldn't do postures so dynamically. In other words, not so much movement. You wouldn't do such intense postures that will raise the heart rate. Yep. The reason for the challenging postures in the first place, the reason for the advanced postures or progression through the series, is that these postures get you into the sympathetic nervous system because they're stimulating. So you don't do those ones. Do simple asanas, and then you breathe differently. I've mentioned the breathing in a different podcast, so I refer you back to one of my previous podcasts about how to use the diaphragm. If you're using the diaphragm in its normal way, in other words, you hold where it is held from the ribs and moves downwards at its origin. This is belly breathing, and that's just good for regulating the nervous system. Yeah, just getting you into the rest or digest nervous system or the parasympathetic. But you're also able to hold the diaphragm from the middle, from its origin, and move it from the sides where it attaches to the rib cage. And if you do that, you'll breathe in the upper chest, so-called thoracic breathing. And because of the pressure exerted on the spine in that area, is felt to be stimulating. Yeah. In belly breathing, it's the opposite. Because of the pressure felt on the vagal nerve, which is running up the length of the body, but is contacted well around the abdomen area, yeah, it tones the vagal nerve and gets you into the relaxing nervous system. Yeah? So depending on how you use the diaphragm, depending on how you breathe, makes a huge difference as well in terms of how you want to structure your practice. Right? So this is not easy now, because now we have to take responsibility for our practice, but ultimately that's yoga. Taking responsibility is, I often think about that term aloneness, kavalia, being the aim of yoga. It means liberation, to be like a cavalier, yeah. But it really means aloneness. That's the actual translation of the word, and it means self-sovereignty or taking self-responsibility, which does mean standing alone and having the courage to think for oneself. Yep. It also means the independence, as Patanjali says, from praise or blame. So you've got a sense of integrity that can't be taken away from you, but it also takes a lot of courage to stand alone. So again, going back to reiterate, when you get on your mat, take a moment, minute or two, 5 minutes, lie down or sit down, scan your body, see what you want to do today, feel what your aims are, and suit the methods to your aims. You have to suit the method to the aim. Yeah? And then feel free to change that. If it's not working, change it through practice, yeah, to something different. Yeah? So yes, repeating the same sequence, repeating the same kind of style of practice, really good. It gives you the discipline. It helps you notice things more clearly. It allows you just to, in a way, tune out and not have to think sometimes. Yeah. Nevertheless, at a certain point, variation is also essential. We have to vary because we aren't all the same. Yeah. And we're constantly in these organic spirals, these organic seasons. And so repetition, if you're just doing the same thing every day, it involves a muscling through it from the mind and a lack of connection to the actual body. Yeah, and I did it for years, so I'm the worst culprit for just repeating the same because you think it works and it did work once, and not wanting to change anything because you're kind of scared to change anything. I don't necessarily mean big changes. I mean, pragmatically speaking, about Ashtanga practice, if we're talking about Ashtanga, maybe one variation or two a day if you're at home. Of course, you're in a group, you can't change things. You're in a classroom situation where everyone's doing the same thing, and there's reasons for that. There's positive reasons for sticking to the same thing in a classroom situation. Yeah. But when you're at home, you should vary things, I think, just to keep your mind aware. I mean, repetition helps you sharpen your mind, but repetition can easily dull the mind. Variation can often motivate and inspire the mind. So a little bit, one or two things, but perhaps one or two postures of variation every time, and then once a week or even twice a week, full variation of your sequence. Yeah, just a freestyle, different things. Just break it up, yeah, and see how that feels. Because ultimately, we are looking for freedom, not just sticking to a format, sticking to discipline for forever. Once you've understood discipline, and you know you can be disciplined, then it begs the question: now, how can you still be disciplined in greater and greater freedom, in greater and greater variation? So, just to go back to how to vary your practice to suit your seasons, well, it can be varied in three ways. The intensity of the posture. So, if you're doing Hatha yoga, intense postures to get lightly into the sympathetic nervous system, to go through the state of arousal and cleanse trauma by going through that state and letting go after a process of catharsis. Yeah? So you would use dynamic posture, dynamic movement, intense postures, and upper chest thoracic breathing. If you're doing yoga to regulate, you're in a state of life where you don't want to do anything like that, and there's definitely parts of our life when we don't, then it's less postures, belly breathing, and less movement. Right? Getting to the parasympathetic nervous system of regulation. Doesn't mean you can't follow the Ashtanga, but you would maybe pick one posture from each group. Like for say you've got standing postures, pick a couple of postures from there. Seated postures, pick one of Janu Shishasanas, one or two of the Marichasanas. You can see that you've got groups. So you don't do many postures, and you pick the simple, easy ones, and you hold them for longer. I mean, you don't need to do the Ashtanga at all, but sometimes it's nice still to have a framework. But you can easily do Ashtanga in a way that regulates the nervous system as well as stimulates it. It all depends on attention, on how you're doing it, right? And perhaps more forward folds there. If you're regulating the nervous system, forward folds seem to be nurturing, calming. Yeah, and perhaps because of the pressure again on the vagal tone, the vagus nerve. More closing postures, lightly inverting the body. A light stimulation on the neck, because the neck is a fundamental place of trauma. So if you put light weight on the neck, it actually helps to stimulate the neck and release that trauma, funnily enough. And too much tension in the neck does the opposite. Yep. All the time we have the paradox, the poison may be the medicine or the poison. It depends on the dose. Yeah. So a light stimulation of the neck with a light weight, helpful for releasing trauma that's stored through the muscles of the neck. Too much tension or unaware tension in the neck re-puts you into that fight or flight nervous system, because the neck is, as I said, a primary place of deep tension in the body, deep held tension in the body, simply because the body tenses it. Whenever we've got emotional stress, the body tenses the neck because it's trying to keep you safe. And it doesn't recognize the physical threat from the mental threat. And the neck is one of the most vulnerable places in the body. So you're not physically falling over, but if you're emotionally challenged, the body just has the same reaction. Tense the neck to protect you, even though there's not a physical challenge. So positions of the neck, a light closing series with light weight on the neck. Yeah. Everything has its season. It's just a question of developing your listening. Yeah. Because it's not easy to listen. I think it takes courage again. It takes courage to listen, and it takes courage to vary. And it's easy to stick to the same thing, but then we close down. If we just stick to the same thing and always follow other people's instructions, then we're just going to end up replicating a formula that ultimately doesn't work for us. So how do you know? How do you know whether you're doing it right? Whether you're getting it, whether you're actually listening to yourself, and whether you're using yoga really for the process of the holistic process, let's say, of I don't know how to put it really. What are we aiming for on a deeper level? Mental, emotional development, or well, I hesitate to put it into metaphysical terms, but perhaps a deep sense of meaning, truth even. Some people before the 20th century, all people in fact, said God. Yoga was for the sake of practicing for the realization of God. And now I think we'd say getting a deeper sense of ourselves, getting a deeper sense of a connection and meaning in life. But whatever your aims are, you have to find a quantifiable way to see if you're achieving them. Because if you're not, just do something different. I mean, don't have to sack off yoga altogether, but change your yoga up so you do. You're meant to experience the positive benefits. And if you're not experiencing them, then don't just think practice, all is coming, because it's not. Yep. If you're not experiencing them now, the likely is you never will. They won't be experienced in the future either. So how do you know? Well, the most obvious litmus test is, how do you feel during the day? Do you leave your yoga practice feeling stirred up, ungrounded, wrung out, tired, irritable? Or do you leave your yoga practice feeling grounded, calm, energetic, expansive, clear? And, well, of course, we have days where we get it wrong, and we have times when yoga practice feels difficult. Afterwards, it brings up stuff, etc. So nothing could be perfect every day, but generally speaking, if you go through a number of days when it's not working, then you need to look at it and think, well, I've got to vary something. And just because you're doing Ashtanga, it doesn't mean you can't. The Ashtanga is a framework. It's a framework of general principles of how to operate, how to do this Hatha yoga in a certain style. Ashtanga is just Hatha yoga after all, the yoga of stimulating the nervous system for a process of catharsis in a certain style, with a set format. but it has to be adapted to make it work for you. And I think it's easy to just take it as a magic spell or talisman. If we just simply do it, we'll be rewarded somewhere for our obedience, for our consistency, but we won't. Yeah? No one's going to reward you for it. It has to work on an experiential level and a practical level by you doing the stuff for your physical body that works. Right? Hatha being, as I said, forceful, but not really forceful in terms of forcing the body to do something, but more a mechanistic way of changing the mind. Yeah. If you use the body in a certain way, you change the energy of the body, and that affects the mind. Yeah. And it is powerful, and even more so because if the poison isn't the medicine, it's generally the poison. So if it's not working, it really doesn't work, right? So if it's, do you see what I mean? if it is working, yeah, great, but it's not just usually that it's just simply not working. It's like actually detrimental, right? If it isn't working, it's actually detrimental. Is what I was trying to say. Yeah. Yeah, so the poison isn't the medicine; it is the poison. It tends to be the way with yoga. It'll either helpful or actively unhelpful if you get it wrong. So experiment with it. It's your challenge. It is your experiment after all. And no one can know in the end. No teacher, however authorized and certified they are and however esteemed they are on social media, no teacher knows better than you in the end about how to make this work for you. And as I said, some days you should take it easy. Definitely introduce a variation once a week, a full variation, and then every day, maybe one or two things just to keep you inspired, to keep you varied. And if you do that, just know that you are still sticking to tradition. Yeah, you're just using it in the way that tradition has always been used to work for your current needs. Otherwise, it's useless being traditional if it's not working. Okay, that's enough for today. I hope you made some sense out of that. I found that one hard to record for some reason. Some of them just flow, and this one I felt it has been challenging because I suppose this gets to the crux of the Ashtanga method in the way that it is based on these set sequences, and that's the common definition of Ashtanga. But I don't take it like that. I look at Ashtanga really as a method of Hatha yoga, and the sequences just happen to be there for the use of the individual to not have to think every day, and for the use of the teacher to be able to teach in a group context. Because if you imagine if we didn't have the sequences and we went to a class and everyone did self-practice, because you have to self-practice to get anywhere in yoga, right? You can't just follow a class. You need to get into your own breath and your own space. Yeah. So self-practice is essential. And if we're going to self-practice, then in order to be in a classroom and a teaching situation, we need the set sequences just as a logistic tool to help the teacher know how to help us. Because if everyone's doing their own thing, it's just a free fall. It's just crazy. And I did have that idea before, like just let people self-practice without saying we have to stick to this Ashtanga sequence. And it doesn't work because you can't really help people if there's so much variation. Try it and see you'll know what I mean straight away. Anyway, I hope to catch you somewhere. As I say, I'm taking a brief hiatus from the physical teaching, and not least because I'm having my hip done. I mentioned on the podcast before my hip replacement. So if you've got to this stage in the podcast, there you go. You heard it. The date is set for July 17th, so a month from today when I recorded it. And hopefully, all being well, I'll be back to teaching in a few weeks after that. But I am taking a little break, as you might imagine, from the physical teaching, just to just to let that go as good as it can. So there you know. So now you know when it's being done, and thanks for your support in that as well. Right. Hope you enjoyed this one. And we're back next week with another guest. Certainly the Key on Yoga podcast will not stop, regardless of what's happening to me or my body. We'll be back every week in the summer with another guest, and I'll let you know how I'm doing as well as my operation recovers, or as I recover from my operation. All right, so bye for now, and see you next week.